so that folks who were not able to attend will be able to reference this at a later point in time. And once I finish with this part, I'll be starting that recording. And we're hoping to have this posted to the AAC's website within a week. And then also a message will be coming out stating that this recording is available. Hopefully today what we'll be able to do is talk about the new probation and suspension policy and go over some specific examples, some tangible examples, so that we can inform our students the best during this advising cycle, because we will have students who in the past were not eligible for suspension in the fall semester, but under the new policy, they will be. We do have a few folks here who are going to help us through the presentation today, and I will let them introduce themselves. So I'm one of those, Freddie McDonald, and I'm the Director of Advising and Recruitment within the Center for Learning, Advising, and Student Success. Ame, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. And it looks like we have like 95 participants and growing. And I'm the University Registrar.
Joy?
You got me right as I was taking a sip of coffee. My name is Joy Carr. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Studies for Everly College.
Joe, are you on?
I am Freddie. Hello, everybody. I guess you know me. I'm Joe Seaman. I work in the Center for Learning, Advising, Student Success, and also for the Provost Office.
Valerie, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
I'm Valerie Lastinger. I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the Everly College of Arts and Sciences.
And none of this would have been possible without the amazing support from Jen Clutter. And I will let Jen introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Freddie. That's really a nice compliment. I appreciate it. I really had nothing to do with it. I defer to all of the experts that are here today. I'm Jen Clutter from the School of Pharmacy, and I serve on the Advising Council Executive Committee, and I'm co-chair along with Michelle Poland. And I'm glad you're here today.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for attending again. We really want to make this an informational session, so please ask your questions. We will ask that you hold those questions until the question and answer portion, but today what we're going to cover is the policy itself. We'll open it up for a small Q&A session, and then we're going to jump into some examples, some case studies of students and situations that we may be seeing students in this semester. So without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Valerie to start off on the policy.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah. All right, good. Okay, I couldn't hear anybody anymore, so I was worried. All right, so what we did is we put together a few slides to go over the changes that we're implementing this semester and the things that will remain the same. So we asked you in the invitation email to familiarize yourself with the new policy if you haven't. So I'm going to try to go quickly over this part of the presentation so that we have more time for questions and case studies. So this is actually the implementation of the policy. The policy is no longer new because we've had it for about a year, but December 2020 is the first time where students are going to be evaluated under the new policy. So what has changed? So in the past, the first thing is that we only ran the suspension process once a year, and that was in May after grades are posted. We are now going to run that process at the end of each regular term, and a regular term is either the fall term or the spring term. So we will run the process at the end of December when grades post, and then in May. In the past, the suspension was independent of the number of probation that you have received. So we all know that if you receive the probation in the fall and you withdrew for the spring, then you would never be suspended. So some students only came back in the summer and the fall, and then they would either register or withdraw from the spring so that they would not be suspendable. Now the suspension is going to be tied to the number of regular terms when the GPA goes below a 2.0. And for me, that is the easiest way to understand what is happening. and we'll talk about that a little bit later. In the past, you could have the surprise suspension because the suspension was not tied to probation. So if you started in the spring semester and you didn't have a 2.0 at the end of May, you were suspended. So that policy was not very productive for our transfer students, for example, or for our first-time freshmen who came on board in January. With the new policy, students must have earned an overall GPA lower than a 2.0 for 3 terms to be placed on the first suspension and for 2 terms for the second suspension and beyond. So the surprise policy meant that first-time freshmen and first-time transfer could be suspended after only 1 or 2 terms at WVU. With the new policy, that is no longer the case. Every student will be guaranteed 3 semesters to perform at the 2.0 level. And then the terms have changed. In the past, it was 1 term, 1 year, and then 5 years. And when we looked at the data, we found that the 1-term suspension was not effective at all because students were barely out the door, that they were, calling their advisors to get back in classes the next semester. The suspension is really not supposed to be a punishment. It's supposed to be a time for students to reflect on what went wrong, correct those things, and then come back and be ready to succeed. And it is very hard to do in 1 term. So the suspension and the new suspension and probation pattern is as follows. So you always need to look at the end of the term when the GPA was earned. So think of it a little bit like when you eat your dinner and you eat too much cake, you're going to be sick the next day. So this is how, probation and suspension works. Banner is going to record your deficient GPA at the end of the term, but it's the next term where you're going to see the consequences of that. But in Banner, it will be marked at the end of that term. So at the end of the first term, when the GPA is below a 2.0, you will get a P1, probation 1. At the end of the second term, a P2. And then at the end of the third term, then you will get your S1, which will be 1 year. So you'll have 3 terms where your GPA was lower than 2.0, and then the first suspension will happen. When you come back from suspension, your 4th term with the GPA below will give you a P3 because you were at P2 and now you're at P3. And then at the end of the 5th term, then you will get your S2. So you will have been here 2 terms, and at the end of that second term, when you return, if your GPA is not satisfactory, you will get an S2, and then on and on, it's the same pattern. Then it moves to 3 years, and then after that, the suspension is 3 years. So one thing to note is, as I said in the beginning, we are speaking only of regular terms, and the terms need not be consecutive. So you could have, you could fluctuate between good standing, bad standing, and then all of a sudden you're on suspension. So a change is going to be the way that the student's academic status is going to be displayed in Banner. So we have good standings, which are going to be G, probation, which is P, and suspension standing. And I've put here, this is not, you cannot see this in Banner yet. And when is that process going to happen?
As soon as we start changing the academic standings to the new codes. So that would probably be in the next 2 weeks.
Okay, so in the next couple of weeks, when you look at your students' degree works, where it now says good standing or academic probation, it will display GS for a student who has never received a probation, and of course, no suspension. And then if the student is on the first probation, that will be a P1, P2, etc. When a student comes back from suspension, the academic status I'm sorry. When the student gets back into good standing after 1 probation, it will be P1. And then G2 will be the student who has had 2 probation. So it's going to count those, logical, in a logical manner following the process that we saw before. And then the same thing for the probation. It's going to count the probations, and then it's going to count the suspension. So this will be 1 year, and then this will start being 3 years, okay? So what is going to remain? We saw the things that we're going to change. What is going to remain the same? Students on probation must have a contract, and the contract is enforced at the college level. Students will be able to appeal their suspension. So in December, when we run this process for the first time, students will be able to appeal that. Of course, we're going to have a shorter time, but what we think is going to happen is because we run the process twice a year, we will actually have fewer people each term who are going to be put on suspension. The appeals process will also heavily weigh in favor of students who have their contract. So it's going to be easier to run the appeals process because we're going to have the documentation of the contracts to look at. So the length of suspension is based on the number of months. So when we say 1 year, it is 12 months. When we say 3 years, it's 36 months. And that was the same, but that's always something that students had difficulty to understand. So if, for example, if they were suspended, for 1 year, they, at the end of May, they wanted to come back for the summer term instead of coming back for the fall term, but the suspension ran from fall to fall. The academic standing process is not going to be run after the summer term only, but the standing will be updated from P or S to G if the student remediates, okay? So, but the S and the P will remain in Banner. And that's a little bit confusing for advisors and for students. So we'll have some examples to go a little bit deeper into this, and that's why we're going to have the examples to understand this kind of situation. The fall and the summer standings will be affected by winter and Maymester performance, but only in a positive manner. So we're not going to suspend at the end of the winter. So let's say you have a GPA of 2.0 in mid-December when we run the grades for fall, and then you take a mid-semester, you take a winter session course, and now your overall GPA is below a 2.0, we are not going to run the suspension process and put you on suspension after all. So students may not bring back, but conversely, if you had a deficient GPA mid-December, you take a winter course and you remedy your GPA, then we're going to upgrade positively your status. So if you were suspended, you're no longer going to be suspended. And students may not bring back courses taken while they were suspended. They have to wait until their GPA at WVU is at the 2.0. And at that point, they will be able to transfer credit, but that will be provided that they have a transient form, of course. So the appeals process will run this December. It will follow the same appeals process as before. So students will have to go through the contractual readmission program. On the Morgantown campus, for December, the appeal link will be available to students December 1, so before finals, or right when we begin finals. And then it will close on January 8th because classes will start, I believe, on January 19th. So we need to give time to the review boards to review their appeals. And then we need to give that information to the registrar so that the registrar can update the student status in Banner if they have been reinstated, okay? Students will need to demonstrate significant academic improvement in the previous term or explain why they haven't been able to succeed. And that's going to require supporting documentation. And this is where the contract is going to be so important because you're going to sit down with your student, set goals, and the student has to agree to the terms of the contract, and then you're going to be easily able to see if the student indeed has made progress or not. Of course, we always need to, to allow for those cases where something extraordinary happened to a student and the student really could not bring that academic performance up, and you feel confident the student can be successful, then we'll bring the student back. So students may take courses during the winter session to remediate the overall. And if they're successful, then they can come back to WVU in the spring of 2021. So I think we're going to, if you have questions, we're going to start answering questions in just a minute. But if after this webinar you have questions, you should contact your assistant or your associate dean or the director of your program, however your unit is set up. If you are the associate dean or cannot answer your question satisfactorily, you can email the registrar at the registrar's address, and then the registrar team will answer you. We're also building a website where we will have FAQ about that process, and we'll have examples. I'm not going to guarantee that they are witty, but we will try our best to make them witty, so that you will be able to have your questions, answered. We think that we can cover the most common questions with the FAQ, but there are always those situations that are unique where we're going to need to ask additional help to resolve the issue. So now we're going to go to the question, and I think I would like to limit the question portion until 9 o'clock, and that's going to leave us at least half an hour to work on those examples. When we have questions, Joe is going to ask us the questions. Some of them he may be able to condense, and then I will ask Amy, Freddie, or Joy, or myself to answer the questions, so we put all of our heads together. So Joe, do you have any questions so far? You're muted, Joe.
None so far, Valerie, but we are accepting questions in the chat room.
Do you don't have any questions? Okay, so we'll
Not yet.
Okay, so we'll let a couple of minutes, or maybe 1 minute go by, because a couple of minutes is very long. And then we'll start the.
Hey, so we have a question.
All right, very good.
Will appear in degree works? Will it say G1, G2, or will it say P1, P2?
It depends on the student status. Some students will have a P1, some students have a GS, some students will have a G1, some people will have an S2 or an S3. So that's going to be for that student. It's going to reflect what the situation is with the student. So after this is updated in DegreeWorks, we have a communication plan for students, and to tell them to look in their DegreeWorks. And then it's going to also send them a link to the website so they can understand what their status is. And then it's going to direct them to their advisor for, to discuss what their status is, unless it's a GS. And this way they'll be able to be prepared and understand, what is the risk that they incur in December, and what the plan is. Should they take a mid-semester course? Should they plan on taking a winter session course, etc.
Okay, so we have more questions. How many credits will a student be able to take over the winter or May terms? Will they be limited to 3 credits? May, do you want to take this one?
So I just found out in winter they can take up to 2 courses, no more than 5 credit hours. I don't know. I have not heard anything about the Maymester yet.
So we got a question from John Hendricks.
Okay.
What about students currently on probation? Will this be counted as a P1 and the student gets another semester to earn a P2? Freddie, you want to take that one?
Sure, I'd love to take that one. So students will be given their new academic standing at some point in this semester. At this point in time, it is not reflective in Banner or DegreeWorks, but the registrar's office is working on that. This will correspond to where they actually are. So we are not starting anew, where all students who are below a 2.0 at this point in time will receive a P1, for example, but rather it will correspond to what their academic history has been. So if students have been suspended and they're returning, their academic standing is going to look different from a student who's been continuing, who might have been on probation a few different times throughout their academic career. So it will change, and it will not be just kind of a start anew. So there will be students who are going to be eligible for suspension after this semester, depending on what their academic history has been.
Okay, so we got a question from Todd. Contracts, what will be the process? Will forms be online or paper? And will DegreeWorks plan be required? A process that allows advisors to focus on the student more than the process would be appreciated. So Valerie, do you mind taking this one, or Joy?
Well, Joy, go ahead.
So in terms of the process for contracts, that's up to the individual college. As the slides mentioned earlier, the students are going to appeal basically the same way as they did before. So as whatever your college process is for tracking students who are on academic probation and interacting with them, that is, you know, that's what you'll need to follow. I'm sure that the CRP will provide some guidance if this is not something that your unit typically works with. DegreeWorks plans, at least a 3-term plan, is highly recommended so that students at the very least are able to see how long it will take them to get on the right track. But that really is up to the college. I know that for our office in Eberly, we do our online now. We were doing them online before COVID, but with the need to work from home, I think finding other online options is ideal. Students need to have a way to demonstrate that they're coming into compliance. So at the very least, we need to find something to demonstrate if they do get into an appeal situation that they have been working with the college up to this point.
Thanks, Joy. There's a question from Sarah. Will there be an Argos report showing everyone's status? May?
Yes, we'll just need to update the reports we have out there currently that we'll just pull in the new codes.
And
Okay, so we have a question.
let me add this too, is that as soon as we are, as we're working on updating all of this in Banner, the colleges are going to receive the list of their students who have either a P or an S, who are registered this semester, so that you can start, you know, telling your advisors or messaging your students about what their status is and if you want them to come in and make an appointment. So we are working on that list, and then you're going to get that very soon.
Thank you, Valerie.
How do you know what's me?
From Betsy, will P2 students be notified that they are at risk of suspension, or will advisors need to reach out? May, I think this is your area.
No, we're going to send a list to the advisors first, and then we're going to send a list to the students that are on that list that are subject to possible suspension. That way they're aware of it, so you don't have to communicate, but you also, as an advisor, have that information beforehand.
And then the email is going to tell them how to check their status, what their status means, and what to do about their status. So it's a very simple email with 3 actions that the students must take. Joe, do you have other questions?
Not currently.
Okay, so I think it's almost 9 o'clock, so I'm going to turn the presentation over to Freddie, and this is going to be the more interactive part of the presentation, where Freddie and Joe have come up with case studies, and you're going to have a chance to think about your answer, and then we're going to go over the answers. So here's the first scenario. Question number 1, Johnny Mountaineer is a first-time student. So he starts in this fall, he finishes the fall term with an overall GPA below a 2.0. Will he be placed on academic probation for spring 2021? So Freddie, I'm going to let you take it from there.
Thanks so much, Valerie. Appreciate that. So we're going to have these different scenarios and questions associated with them. We also have some polls that we're going to launch. So Jen, I think we should be good to go ahead and launch that first poll. So if you could just take a moment to answer that question. Again, Johnny is finishing the fall term with an overall GPA below a 2.0. Will he be on probation in spring 2021? Also, we had another question come in the chat, so I'm just going to kind of direct that one to Amay while you're answering that question. Amay, the question is when will the status report be issued? So that report of students who are eligible for suspension.
To the advisors?
Yes, and to the students.
Yes. Well, the advisors will get it before, so I'm hoping to start doing that next week.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Amay.
And then the students afterwards.
Absolutely. All right, so Jen, we can probably close that poll and we will go ahead and move on to the next slide to see the correct answer. So, of course, yes, Johnny will be placed on academic probation as his standing in degree works for next term will be reflective of a P1 probation, right? He'll have to enter into contract with his college or school, as we talked about earlier, and this will include specific requirements to help him improve his overall GPA to a 2.0. So hopefully, again, getting into these, pretty straightforward, hopefully for the first few. So continuing with Johnny, right? He continues with his studies in the spring 2021 term. He works hard to meet the terms of his contract and he raises his overall GPA to a 2.0 after the spring term. Will Johnny be on academic probation after the spring 2021 term? Again, we're going to launch another poll, a simple yes/no answer. It looks like, yep. Jen, when launching the poll, there should be a drop-down menu where you can choose which question you would like to. There it is.
I just found it as you were saying it.
Absolutely. So again, if you just want to answer that question, so again, he is currently on probation. He works hard to raise his overall GPA to a 2.0. Will Johnny be on academic probation after spring 2021? And Jen, I'm going to say we can go ahead and close that one. So most people answering no. And if we move on to the answer, that is absolutely correct. No, since Johnny was able to improve his overall GPA, he'll be placed in good academic standing. And this is kind of where we will see those academic standings change between P's or S's or G's. His will change to a G1, meaning that he had one probation term in the past. So it will be a G1. However, he will be in good academic standing after he served that term of probation. Moving on with Johnny and continuing his studies, he continues into the fall 2021 term. He does not do as well as what he would have liked, and his fall grades bring his overall GPA below a 2.0. Will he be placed on probation again? And so if you want to just take a moment to respond to that question. And for those that will be watching this recording after the live session, you can play along as well. The questions will not be live, but you can kind of answer them to yourself, and then you'll be able to see those answers as they are revealed. So yes, Johnny will be placed on a second academic probation, and that will change to a P2. Means that he has had 2 semesters of probation. However, Johnny will be able to continue his studies, but he will have to enter into contract with his college or school. And coming to the last question for Johnny. So he continues his studies in the spring 2022 term. However, he's unable to raise his overall GPA to a 2.0. Will Johnny be placed on academic suspension? And Jen, I will say, let's go ahead and close that one, and we should be good. So again, 92% of attendees or respondents answering yes to that, and we will see the answer here. Yes, right? So Johnny had already served 2 previous terms of probation. However, he was not able to raise his overall GPA to above that 2.0 in that 3rd term, which would mean that he is placed on a 1-year academic suspension. As in the past, the registrar's office will notify students who are placed on suspension, and his academic standing in DegreeWorks and in Banner will be changed to an S1, right? Meaning 1 suspension. Again, that 1 suspension is changing, so it's no longer 1 term, but rather 1 year. So hopefully that first scenario was pretty straightforward, but as we move into the next scenario, it will get a little bit more difficult. So Jen, if we want to go ahead and jump on over. So this scenario, the first question, is going to assume that a suspension process was run after the spring 2020 term. Although we know that a suspension process was not run after that term, this example, or in particular this question, will assume that one did run. So we're looking into Susie Mountaineer. She started at WVU in the fall 2019 term. It didn't go well her first year, and her overall GPA was below a 2.0 after both the fall 2019 and the spring 2020 terms. At that point in time, she was placed on a 1-semester academic suspension, as this was prior to the new suspension policy being implemented. However, she did appeal her suspension and it was granted. This allowed Susie to continue her studies in fall 2020. By the end of the fall 2020 term, she has raised her overall GPA to a 2.0. What is Susie's academic standing after the fall 2020 term? Now, we were hoping to have the code sent out with the chart. We apologize, we had some technical difficulties trying to get that out. So we may see a lot of different answers on this one, and that is absolutely fine. But if you could take a moment just to respond to that one. And Jen, if it looks like enough people have responded, we can go ahead and move forward to the results. So a variety of different answers. However, the most popular answer was that G3, 1 suspension. So that is absolutely correct. G3, 1 suspension. As Susie had been previously suspended, however, she raised her overall GPA within good academic standing. That is where that G3 will come. The 1 suspension, or S1, that is beside that is a good indicator that this is how that would have played. And I can see there's a question in there. The appeal doesn't play into this. Exactly as it had in the past, if a student appeals or if they take courses in the preceding winter or fall, or sorry, the succeeding winter or fall term, they can bring themselves into good academic standing. With the appeal, their suspension will still stand, right? So it is as if they were suspended, although they did not serve their suspension. However, that suspension will still stand. So the next time that Susie comes eligible for suspension, she would be serving her S2, which would also be a 1-year academic suspension. So moving on to the second question with Susie. So she's continuing her studies in the spring 2021 term. However, she did poorly in almost all of her classes and her GPA fell below that 2.0. What is Susie's academic standing after the spring 2021 term? So Jen, whenever you think that looks good. So a close tie on that P3 or S2. So P3 being 3 probations, S2 being 2 suspensions. In this case, it will be a P3. Since she had been previously suspended, right? She was in good academic standing following that semester after that suspension. However, this is the first time that she is falling back below 2.0, which would mean that she would be entitled to another term of probation before she would be eligible for suspension. So in that case, it would be a P3 or 3 probations. Joy has a point of clarification. So suspensions always stay on the student's record, right? Even if they appeal and are allowed to continue without serving it. When students are deferred from serving their suspension, it is still recorded in Banner. Thank you so much for that point of clarification, Joy. I really appreciate that. So Susie Mountaineer is now on a P3, and she is able to continue her studies in the fall 2021 term. She finishes with an overall GPA below a 2.0. Will she be placed on academic suspension? So if you can respond to that poll, quick yes, no. So we can see most respondents saying yes, she will be suspended. And if Jen, you want to show that answer. So yes, Susie will be placed on another 1-year academic suspension after the fall 2021 term. She was already on, or was already on probation. And after serving the first suspension, students only receive 1 more term of probation until they are eligible for suspension, right? Unlike a first-time freshman or a first-time transfer, which will receive 2 terms of probation before eligible for suspension, returning students from suspension, whether it's their first suspension or their second suspension or further, will only receive 1 term of probation before being eligible for it. So in this case, yes, Susie would be eligible for suspension. However, Susie's continuing her academic journey and she enrolls in a 3-credit-hour winter intersession course. This raises her overall GPA to a 2.0. Is Susie permitted to continue her studies in the spring 2022 term? So we can see most respondents answering yes to that one. And the correct answer is yes. Again, this is a change, whereas students just in summer are able to remediate their overall GPA. Moving forward, students will be able to do the same in winter in order to continue their studies. So Susie is permitted to continue her studies in spring 2022 because she was able to return to good academic standing. However, that second one-year suspension still counts on her, against her, right? So just as Joy had clarified, that will still be recorded in Banner. This means that her academic standing will change to a G5, meaning she's in good standing, but she has had 2 previous suspensions. And that will be recorded in DegreeWorks and in Banner. And moving on to the last scenario for Susie. So Susie Mountaineer continues her studies into spring 2022, and her overall GPA drops below a 2.0 after the spring term. Will she be placed on academic suspension? So again, a mix of answers here. The answer is no. So because Susie used the previous winter intersession to bring herself into good academic standing, she's actually able to continue her studies. She did not serve another term of probation after her suspension, right? So she would actually move into a P4 before she would be eligible for suspension again. So a little bit tricky on that one. But because she did not serve a term of probation after her second suspension, she would be eligible for 1 more term of enrollment before eligible for suspension. And actually, we might have one more question. Yep,
Yes.
Sorry about that, everyone. So Susie is continuing on that P4 into the fall 2022 term. At this point in time, her overall GPA drops below, oh, I put the spring term there, I apologize, after that fall term. Will she be placed on academic suspension after this term? So Jen, whenever it looks good. So most people responding with a yes on that one. And that is correct. Susie will be placed on that 3-year academic suspension after the fall 2022 term. That academic standing will change to an S3 of 3 suspensions in DegreeWorks and Banner. So again, here is where we see again that change. That 3rd suspension will no longer be 5 years, but rather a 3-year academic suspension. So I hope that these scenarios were helpful in trying to contextualize and put into some cases of students that we may be seeing. As we all can kind of attest to, we will have students who are going in and out of good standing and probation, coming back from suspension, but appealing or taking courses. So it does, require a lot of attention to detail. Once those academic standing codes are updated in Banner and DegreeWorks, it will be a lot easier to be able to tell what is that next step for a student should they fall below a 2.0. But at this point, I really appreciate everyone participating in those scenarios, and I will turn it over back to Valerie for anything else and to wrap up.
So we're going to wrap up this session. I want to ask if you have any last question. I think what was difficult with the scenario is that you didn't have the chart that we had on the slide before, and then you don't really have time. I think the easiest way to understand this or clarify this in your mind is to count the times the GPA is below a 2.0 at the end of the fall term, including classes for the winter session. So count how many times the GPA is below a 2.0 and then refer to the chart to see what the status moves to. And remember that what is in Banner remains in Banner. So an appeal never changes the student's record because we don't change students' records. Just in the same way that we don't change transcripts, we don't change probation status, otherwise we would never be able to count them. So do you have any last questions?
Hey, Valerie, it's Joe. I just wanted to follow up on the question that Todd Hamrick asked about the 3-semester plan. Although we're using the contractual readmission or CRP nomenclature for fall, I wanted everybody to be aware that financial aid suspension and academic suspension have been decoupled, meaning that any student who is appealing financial aid will need to appeal through the financial aid website. The CRP in the fall, and if we continue it after fall, will only be for academic suspension.
I have a question, Valerie. If you could go back to the first slide scenario on Johnny.
Let me reopen PowerPoint.
Sorry.
That's all right. Okay, let me share my screen again. So you wanted the first Johnny slide?
Yes, the first Johnny slide.
All right, here we are.
I want to get some clarification about this because I'm confused. I was under the understanding that as a freshman, and I know Johnny is not listed as a freshman here, but it says he did start in the fall of 2020. So first-time transfers and first-time freshmen. So technically, he would not be placed on probation, would he?
Yes, he would, because his GPA was below 2.0 at the end of fall. So it's not that first-time freshmen cannot earn probation. They cannot be suspended because they need to have their GPA below a 3.0 for 3 terms before the suspension is enforced. So we count the times where the GPA goes below the 2.0, and that's a probation status is upgraded each time, but there is no suspension possible.
Right, because of the 3 times.
We have to start counting because otherwise, those students would have been deficient for 3 terms, and then we would start counting the deficiencies. They would bury themselves in a financial hole that they would, not be able to come out of. So the probation count, it's just that a first-time freshman and a first-time transfer student cannot be placed on suspension because of the number of probation they need to earn before that.
Great, thank you for that clarification.
And I would like to add, and this is I think Lawrence asked a question about the summer remediation, and Joy did answer it. Thank you, Joy. So this is where it's going to be unique. And it's just because summer is its own term. We will actually replace, if a student has a probation or a suspension at the end of spring and they still want to remediate their GPA, they can do it in the summer. If they rise above a 2.0, then I will actually put a good standing code out there. I can't do that for winter to show two different standings because winter is tied to fall. So that is why you replace it with the appropriate code. Hopefully that provides some clarification.
Any additional questions? All right, so we will follow up with building the website. The presentation will also be available for review. And then next week, expect to receive the list of students who could be suspended in December. So it's not going to be every student who has ever received a probation or suspension. It's only going to be those students who can be suspended at the end of the fall term. And then we'll do the same thing again in the spring semester. You will receive a list of your students who are at risk of being suspended at the end of the spring term. So watch for that, and then your students will also be receiving an email. And so expect to be contacted by your students. If the students don't contact you and you want to contact them, then that's fine as well. So thank you for attending this workshop, and let's hope our students do well this term and we don't have too many appeals because nobody will be placed on suspension. That's my wish for everybody.
I'd like to thank everybody, Joe, Freddie, Amay, and Valerie for your expertise.
Enjoy.
Sorry about that, Joy. You disappeared off my screen, my bad. For all of your expertise, it's very, very helpful. We have had a number of participants who have asked for the slides to also be shared. So we will get those out to you early next week, and we'll notify you also at that same time of when the recording is posted on our website so that you can share that with any colleagues who were not able to view this, or if you had to join late or leave early, and so on. With no further ado, we do have another workshop coming up. When is that, Freddie?
It's going to be Tuesday, October 6th.
Okay. And so that is all going to be about wellness for students and for ourselves, and putting our own oxygen masks on first. So I just want to put that plug out there shamelessly and hope that you are able to join us for that session as well. Thank you all for your great input and questions, and we'll look forward to seeing you on October 6th.
Freddie, there's a question about what time is the session?
Yep. I just saw that, Joe. Thank you. That session will be from 10 to 12, is what it is scheduled. We, of course, will record that for anyone who is not able to attend during that time. You're absolutely welcome, Maureen.
Freddie and Joe and Amy and Joy, can you stay on? I have a question to ask you.
Sure.
Sure.